Welcome to Supervision. My name is Robert Farrell, LPC Supervisor here in the state of Texas, and I have been making these videos now in sequence of my own creation for several months, and they are designed for the LPC associates that are under me that I am supervising. If you are not one of them, then you are still welcome to watch. I hope you get something from these. If you are one of my supervisees, then I have probably talked to you about watching this and have either emailed you the link or have asked you to go and watch it. In any case, again, well, all of these are demonetized. I'm not making any money from these, nor do I want to. The purpose of this is to give information to new counselors that I'm working with to help them grow. Okay, so if you happen to stumble across these, you'll find others on many other topics: ethics, Texas Administrative Code, safety, self-disclosure, you name it. Eventually, I will be getting to a lot more topics. Today's topic is, as you can see, psychotic disorder. We're going to be looking at the DSM. Now, I need to apologize to you right up front. This is going to be a long video series on this one alone. We're covering a lot of material. Some of it is going to be repetitious. Some of it is going to be new. I'm going to be putting in some of my own information and experiences to help get the ball rolling. So, the outcomes you're going to experience from today, hopefully, or at least should be, understanding and the ability to differentiate key elements of psychotic disorders. That will include identifying criteria for the psychotic disorder, as well as recognizing some of the nuances of the different disorders. They are subtly unique individually. That's why we have different ones. So having said that, we will dive in and get things started. I will be removing my video here of myself momentarily, mostly because you don't need to be seeing me. The information is more important than look at me. So anyways, sit back, relax, get something to drink, pause if you need to, and let's just push through. And the categories we will be looking at include delusional disorder, the F22 category, F23, brief psychotic disorder, F20.81, schizophreniform disorder, F20.9, schizophrenia, F25, schizoaffective disorder. These are, I'm also going to be incorporating different images that I've found online because throughout history, this is the one psychotic problem, the delusional problem, the hallucinations, the behaviors and mannerisms that have caused psychology to become such a fascinating interest to so many students throughout the world. Anyone that's had a psychology class in college, usually they want to jump into the abnormal psychology class because that's the one that's fascinating, but a lot of times they would just get that one after doing the introduction to psychology. So, okay. We're looking here specifically at F22 delusional disorders. Delusions are fixed beliefs that are not amenable to change by conflicting evidence. This one here is what makes delusions so difficult. Learning to test reality and challenging your client can be a little dangerous. Okay? So we're going to look at a couple of these delusions right now. Persecutory delusions, or delusions of persecution, are beliefs that people are going to be harmed by some other organization, individual, or group. Oftentimes, these ones here can include Men in Black, or CIA, or FBI, or gang members, or terrorists. It's amazing how these delusions can come out of nothing, almost. Okay, so references. Delusions of references are beliefs that gestures, comments of environmental cues and the like that are directed at the individual specifically. I know that sounds kind of odd, So a delusion of reference would be, in the Houston area, one that I've seen a lot of, which would be air conditioners talking to people. The belief that they can do that, not the actual auditory hallucination, but the belief that technology can communicate with them specifically, expressing information that only they get. A delusion of grandiosity or the grandiose delusion is the belief that an individual has exceptional abilities, wealth, fame, that kind of thing. The image there is of an interesting one. A lot of cats, we think, have this idea that they're actually tigers. And the dog's looking himself going, I'm just a dog. Grandiose qualities are kind of unique. You will run into them fairly often. My personal take on that is that it's a defense mechanism to cover a vulnerability or a sense perceived weakness. Nobody wants to be weak in the world, and so they come up with ideas that are delusional in order to feel better about themselves. So that leads us to the next one, the erotomanic. This delusional belief is kind of interesting, in that it's the belief that people are in love with the individual, when in fact they're really not. If you've ever had a significant other who believes that, and you try to get away from them, they hold on to it, and it can be very unsettling. The next one would be the nihilistic delusion. This one's kind of unique. I can honestly say I've only learned this one a few times in my career. This is a delusional belief where the idea that a major catastrophe will occur, and they come up with dates and times, and they truly believe that something bad is going to happen. The next one is the somatic delusion. This one here is oftentimes focusing on the belief that there's a health problem or an organ failure functioning problem that is just very preoccupying in their mind. They can't get rid of it. So for a delusion to be deemed a delusion, it must be bizarre and clearly impossible and not understandable to the same culture here, and does not derive from ordinary life experience. An example here would be to include external entities or organizations removing internal organs of an individual and replacing them with something else. Delusions that express a loss of control of personal abilities, bodily functions, or that like, oftentimes are considered bizarre. Okay? The idea that someone comes to you and says, hey, that this organization took out my internal organs and replaced it with machinery. There is actually that's a common one, really. So you will run into that one in this region at least. Another one is the idea that thoughts are being placed into their mind from outside sources, using lasers, using radar, microwaves, you name it. This can be very debilitating. So it's something that we do have to take into account. And so now we have hallucinations. These are perceptual sensory issues that deal with visual, tactile, auditory, olfactory. These are things where their perception of space becomes altered, and it does have a full force and impact of normal perception, and is not under voluntary control. That's the real key to it. They can't just turn it on and off. And now another quality to this is that it does not occur only at a period of time where a person is waking up or going to sleep. Okay? When they're in that condition, that would not be classified as a hallucination. All right? There is a difference there. So these hallucinations are while the person is fully awake, they've been awake. It's not something that's happening only in the first few minutes of them going to bed at night or in the first few minutes of them waking up in the morning. Or whenever it is that they would wake up. But these are unique situations. The image here, I think, kind of really shows it all. You see on the left, people are obviously more than likely real, whereas the ones on the right are, and along the wall, are shadows. And then there's shadows of shadows. So it can be very, very confusing for someone experiencing hallucination. And now we've got disorganized thinking. This is the most commonly identified issue and most commonly observed through the speech patterns. Okay, so individuals may experience derailment or loss of association, or experience loose associations, as evidenced through flight of ideas. While answering questions when you're talking to them, disorganized thinking may present as giving unrelated responses, tangential responses, where they're connected, but they just don't seem to be going in the same direction that you anticipate. Aphasia, or word salad, the incoherency of disorganized thinking. Quite interesting. That one's actually a little more rare than people would think. I have only seen that one a handful of times over 17 years. It's not as common as you expect it to be. Now, disorganized thinking commonly occurs at the beginning or end of the psychotic break. It can happen in the middle as well if they're going through cycles, but it's a common occurrence in the early stages or later stages. Some of the unusual word use that we want to look at would be the neologism. It's the creation of a new word that doesn't actually exist in our lexicon. Now I want to give a little side note. William Shakespeare created a lot of words. If you do a background check on him and his influence that he had on the English language, if I remember right, he had a background of somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 words that he coined and created for his plays and his writing. Okay, so then we've also got perseveration. The definition here is kind of unique. The continuation or recurrence of an experience or activity without the appropriate stimulus. This was first coined in 1895, and it's kind of interesting in the sense that if the person is talking and they just kind of get stuck on an idea, and they can't get off of that idea, they just go back to it, back to it, back to it, and no matter if you ask questions in a different direction, they come right back to it. They're stuck in it. Similar to clanging. Clanging I've actually seen a few times. It's kind of interesting. The person gets stuck on the sounds of words, and you never know when it's going to happen. They just kind of go on. It seems a little tangential because it would sound like bat, cat, dat, bat, cat, hat, flat, mat, nat, pat, rat, sat, tat, bat. And they just go through the alphabet adding on in order to get those words together. A little different than the word salad aspect. But these are absolutely fascinating when you catch them happening. You want to document those so you can share that with the psychiatrist at the hospitals that you're at, or if you are taking them to a hospital under emergency detention order, or if you're relaying information to the psychiatrist because you've got a release of information that do such, then you want to share this kind of stuff. This really lets the psychiatrist know some of the medications they might want to change. And so now we're getting into probably the most bizarre aspect of psychotic disorders, and that would be abnormal emotion. You'll notice in the pictures there, these are some really old pictures. This stuff does still occur, mostly when people come off of their medications. I've seen a lot of this over the course of my time. So disorganized or abnormal motor behavior has another name, catatonia. It can be present in several different ways. It can be like childlike behaviors of silliness as far as unpredicted agitation, can go as far as causing difficulties in their activities of daily life. For example, those individuals there that are stuck, that would cause a problem in activities of daily living. Severe catatonia behavior would include the inability to move muscles or even have facial expression. Additionally, these can include ranges from negative or negativism, maintaining rigid or inappropriate or bizarre postures. It can even include mutism, where they just stop talking, or in fact, just severe lack of verbal activity, where you may only get a couple of grunts and noises, and that's about it. It should be also noted that catatonia can be equally observed in bipolar disorder and in depression. So this is not a hallmark of only the psychotic disorders. Other severe disorders of bipolar and major depression can experience this as well. Okay, so now we're looking at negative symptoms. We've originally looked at the positive ones, the ones that you would expect to see with a psychotic disorder, but now we're looking at negative symptoms. These are ones more associated with schizophrenia than the other forms of psychotic disorder. There are two specific ones, that being diminished emotional expression, and there's a few others, but that's one of the primaries. The other one would be abolition. So the reduced emotional expression will take the form of a blunted affect, diminished emotional expressions, restricted range of emotion, emotionally cold, constricted affect, reduction in sharing of communication, even having reduced psychomotor activity. Where then abolition is a reduction of energy. The function requires so much more energy that a person just can't seem to get the energy together to go take a shower, they lose interest in activities, people that go outside, go to work. This is a major life-altering issue of symptoms. Another aspect would be anhedonia, the reduction of any pleasurable activities in life, giving up of hobbies and interests. This is commonly also seen in depression as well as bipolar disorder. So this is where a part of the differential diagnosis and looking at other criteria comes in real important. You have to know your criteria well enough to be able to say, okay, what do we have really happening here? And there's also, reduced social interaction and withdrawal. And now we're getting into our first solid disorder of DSM diagnosis, and that would be the F22 delusional disorder. For those that aren't familiar, the F22 is the new coding system that was adopted by the DSM for beginning with DSM-5, and it came out of the ICD International Code format. So we finally joined with that. All right, criteria for the delusional disorder. There's 5 basic requirements, and they're listed alphabetically, A through E. The delusion must be lasting more than 1 month. The time period on these is kind of important, so you want to pay attention to your time periods. The criteria A for schizophrenia has never been met. This person has never been previously diagnosed with a schizophrenic break or anything of that sort. Letter C, apart from the impact of delusions, ramification of delusions, daily functioning, there is no real marked behavioral impairments. Okay, so they don't come across as odd or bizarre. They're not doing things that just seem really strange. D, daily functioning is not impaired. There's no manic or major depressive episodes. And if they are, they're extremely brief in duration. The delusion is really what holds the focus. Right? The most important part, though, is looking at there's no medical cause. induced involved. There is nothing of that sort that will create the delusional aspects. Now, interestingly enough, this category actually has some subtypes, okay, because we're looking specifically at delusions and only delusions. The individual may experience the romantic idea that there are people in love with them, or the grandiose idea that they are, in fact, the king of Zaire or the queen of some African continent country. Or I actually had one who said that he was the king of America and that the president of the United States reports to him. So that one was quite interesting. Jealous subtype can be a very dangerous delusional one to maintain. So if you run into that one, you want to give it some special attention. Persecution, of course, being followed, being persecuted, being harassed. The somatic ones, delusions that their body's something wrong, or mixed. This would be a combination of these delusions. And then, of course, then there is the unspecified. Okay, so the F23 brief psychotic disorder is next. We haven't quite finished up F22, the delusional disorder. In this disorder, we've got some diagnostic features that we discussed briefly. This delusional disorder is not given if the diagnosis of schizophrenia has already been made. I think I mentioned that before. Marital, cultural aspects of the individual's client's life need to be taken into account. This is where your biopsychosocial assessment is going to be very handy. The more you understand their world, their culture, where they came from, their background, this can be very helpful. So lifetime prevalence, this is fascinating. Delusional disorder is approximately 0.2%, with most common being persecution. Additionally, jealous type is more common in males than in females. So delusional disorder or a delusional disorder itself, it happens less than 1% of the population, and the most common is persecution. So the development course of the delusional disorder, usually short-lived, frequently found in families that has a genetic makeup, is what I can figure out. More often in elderly than in the young. However, it can be found in young folks as well. From my experience, I have found that it happens more frequently with those over the age of 50 as opposed to those under the age of 45. Cultural phenomena, also kind of unique. You want to look into their culture. Examples of this would include some Asian cultures, Japan. That's where a lot of the internal removal of organs and replacing with machinery that they've become androids, kind of common. In the last 16 years, I've run into two of those. No other bizarre behavior, no other positive symptoms, no hallucinations, just this belief that they are no longer human. It's quite fascinating. So areas of possible differential diagnosis that can be looked at would be obsessive compulsive related disorders, neurocognitive disorders, substance-induced disorders, and then of course schizophrenia, schizophreniform, as well as depression and bipolar disorder. And so now we're at F23, the brief psychotic disorder. As I mentioned a little bit ago, we're now venturing into another aspect. This one's a little bit different than the delusional disorder. So criteria for the brief psychotic disorder has three components. One of three must be met within criteria A. So they have to have a delusion, hallucination, disorganized speech, grossly disorganized or catatonic behavior. They must have one of those, minimum. Without one, you don't have this diagnosis. Category B, the duration of the episode of disturbance is at least 1 day. but less than 1 month, with full remission and return to level of functioning previously. This is like I said a little bit ago, all of these are time related. There is a time component involved. The brief psychotic disorder on category C there is not better explained by some other diagnosis. Maybe depression, bipolar disorder, a different psychiatric diagnosis of schizophrenia, schizophreniform, some other diagnosis, substance use, etc. All right, so I can't have a discussion about this without bringing Jack in. I love this image of Nicholson that is from the movie he did, and the diagnostic features that we're going to talk about really remind me of that image. That general sensation is short-lived, it's brief, it lasts no more than a month, just over a day. And so sudden onset is a primary diagnostic features. The onset has to last less than 2 weeks, where the actual psychosis lasts no more, or has to be 1 day, but no more than a month. The prevalence in America is actually pretty high when you take into account that 9% experience this at some point in time. It can sometimes lead to other diagnostic conclusions by psychiatrists, but 9% of Americans will experience a brief psychotic disorder at some point in time. Now, the development of it is often found in adolescence and early adulthood, although it can occur at any time in life. Now, in the movie there with Jack Nicholson, the movie was What About Schmidt? Great film. In that sequence, he does not have a true, what we call it, psychotic disorder diagnosis, but he does find himself struggling after his wife dies, and he's trying to figure out what to do with his life. Some differential diagnosis aspects, things to look at would include medical conditions, diabetes, that would be a big one, substance use disorders, alcohol problems, alcohol withdrawal, depression, bipolar disorder, again, schizophrenia, schizoaffective. Also want to look at issues of malingering or factitious disorder. A lot of folks may try to fake this one, but if you're experienced in identifying it, you know your criteria well, you can sometimes, pull those and kind of tease them out. Additionally, you're going to want to look at some personality disorders. There's other things going on here. This is, again, where your biopsychosocial is going to make very handy. And so we're moving into another one. We now have the F20.81 schizophreniform disorder. This one is kind of unique. And so schizophreniform, the criteria here has 4 categories, A, B, C, and D. A is important. 2 or more of the following over the course of 1 month, at least one of them has to be present. Delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech. Other aspects include grossly disorganized or catatonic behavior, or negative symptoms of diminished emotional expression. You have to have 2 or more of these. So very commonly you're going to find the hallucinations, the delusions, and then something else usually falls into play. Now category B, here again the time frame, very important. Must be at least 1 month, but less than 6 months. So you'll notice as we're going on into the severity, more time is involved. In this case, the episode is taking at least 1 month, whereas the pre-psychotic was less than 1 month. We're now over a month, but we're less than 6 months. And the thing is, if there's a diagnosis given, recovery period, very important. If there's an initial diagnosis, it would be provisional in this category. We're not going to see too many of these stick unless nothing ever happens again. And then they may have a choice to make between, is it a brief psychotic, or did we actually get into a schizophrenic form? All right, so in category C, we have ruled out, or the psychiatrist has ruled out, the schizoaffective possibility, depression, or this bipolar disorder possibility, and those ones would have psychotic features, because as you remember, category A, we have to have two or more of those positive and negative features. Also in category D, just amongst, as you see in all of these, you want to rule out biological or substance use related issue that doesn't lead to it or contribute to the problem. All right, now the diagnostic features of schizophreniform, kind of unique. The way it was described for me is based upon the name. They have the form of schizophrenia, but not all of the substance of it. So what we're looking at here is a very similar quality, the criterion of schizophrenia. However, the duration is the key component, less than 6 months, whereas schizophrenia is greater than 6 months. So that subtle nuance of time is your key component. You want to look at that. You may have to go and talk to family, find out and trace back exactly when did they notice the break taking place. Also, as ruling out general medical issues, the time frame is still 6 months. If it goes over that, that would be what would lead your psychiatrist to going on into a schizophrenia diagnosis. Prevalence of very similar to schizophrenia, and this is on a global level. Pretty much everywhere in the world is going to be very similar to this. So development and course, it's identical really to schizophrenia. 1/3 of clients are identified as schizophreniform as an initial diagnosis, and they recover within 6 months. That's 1 out of 3. Those that don't eventually get the diagnosis of schizophrenia. Like I said, as it was taught to me, this has a form of schizophrenia, and they're just waiting for that time period. If the 6-month time period goes by, that diagnosis will change. Cultural related issues are really unspecified. There's no clear component to that one. And again, for differential diagnosis, you really just want to rule out alcohol, drugs, or other medical issues. And so here we are. We have arrived at F20.9, schizophrenia. Like I said earlier, this is the one that pretty much everybody wants to learn about in undergrad psychology, and it is so well studied and so well known that this is the one that really grabs attention. Movies in Hollywood love it, but some of that is just that, movies in Hollywood make believe. All right, so the criteria here is actually broken into 2 slides because we've got altogether 6 different things we have to look at. Category A, you must have 2 or more of these things. Specifically, over a course of time of 1 month, you must have at least delusions, hallucinations, or disorganized speech. If you don't have one of those 3, you do not have schizophrenia. The grossly disorganized or catatonic behavior, fine, that one can be there. Negative symptoms, fine, that can be there, but they're not going to be as pronounced. Without the delusions and hallucinations, or one of those 2 and disorganized speech, it's probably not a clear case of schizophrenia. This is where you're going to want to differentiate and talk to your psychiatrist and get more information. Category B, a significant portion of time, activities of daily life are completely messed up. Relationships, work, education, self-care. Okay? In the case of adolescents and teenagers, failure to achieve levels in school or relationships in school, friends, occupational functioning if they have a part-time job or something, very impaired. Category C, continuous indications of disturbance lasting greater than 6 months. Here is our time period element, and this is where we switch from schizophreniform into schizophrenia. It is very, very important on category C. And the next set of criteria of the conclusion would be D, E, and F. It's important to recognize schizoaffective as well as major depressive disorder and bipolar disorder with psychotic features must be ruled out. They cannot be involved. Now, an important component to this is recognizing that no major depressive or manic episodes have occurred within an active phase of the symptoms. Now, the mood symptoms, they can be there, but that's not the same as depressive or manic symptoms. Okay? You're going to want to look into that a little more detail. Category E, here again, it does not account for general medical or substance use. Just keep it in the back of your mind. General medical issues or medical issues in general will always trump the psychiatric diagnosis. And the reason for that is if we have to take it from the viewpoint that if the medical issue wasn't there, would the psychological or psychiatric issue be present? It has to be ruled out first. It has to be resolved. Same is true with substance use. If there's no addiction happening, then you've got a clear image of what's happening. But if you've got substances involved, then which one came first, chicken or the egg? Now, F. F is really important. Here again, we're going to see a component of time frame. If there's a history of autism spectrum disorder or a childhood communication disorder, an additional diagnosis of schizophrenia is only possible if the delusions or hallucinations, in addition to all the other stuff, have been around for more than 1 month. Here again, time frame is the subtle nuance. And you will find autism spectrum disorder in childhood communications. They will have this diagnosis, and it may even present early in with regards to their chronological age, but they will have it. The doctor won't like to give schizophrenia in conjunction with that unless they really see a greater than 1 month prolonged symptomology of the hallucinations, the delusions, the psychotic qualities. They have to see it. Okay, so features of schizophrenia here's where we're starting to really kind of get into some interesting aspects. Specific diagnostic features of hallucinations and or the delusions are required. They must be there. Time periods of positive and negative symptoms are hallmarks of the diagnostic feature. Requirements of criterion A and other criteria that are required must be present. Specific attention. You must pay extra attention to important areas of functioning, such as occupational, academic, relationships. Those are hallmarks. Those are really important to look at. The negative symptoms, flat affect, emotional reactivity, most common during the residual phase, but they can also be severe. Now, I want to point out that this is one of those qualities where you're going to notice the majority difference of how you interact with your client. If your client has this diagnosis, you want to be real careful on how you address certain issues. You want to be real careful on how you approach the topics of reality testing, and confrontation is probably not your best tool at that point in time. We'll talk more about that in individual sessions, they respond. I'm talking about these people who have this diagnosis, this disorder, really causes an inability to have emotional regulation for confrontation and challenges. When we challenge them, it really has a tendency to piss them off. And so you want to be real cautious about that. Be aware of it. Okay, so associated features. Individuals with schizophrenia often display inappropriate appetite, laughing at inappropriate stimuli or times. There is depression, anger, sleep problems, loss of interest in food, depersonalization, derealization. That's why a lot of the artwork that comes from individuals with schizophrenia looks so bizarre. This slide and on the next, there's going to be some pictures here that demonstrate how individuals with schizophrenia feel and think, and how their bodies actually are perceived by them. All right. Now this image here is quite disturbing. Let me talk for a moment about a client that I had some years ago. I'm not going to share any names. All I will say is that his physical perception was that his lower extremities had been pulled through his rectum, out his mouth, and he had been turned inside out. His organs were on the outside, and that he blamed God for doing it. And that God had then corrected him one night while he was asleep. And so, and he said this would happen to him on a regular basis. He pulled through, and that physical sensation and perception is absolutely terrifying if you think about it. So that's why these images seem so bizarre and unreal. They actually can experience these qualities of dissociation and derealization, depersonalization. Okay, so prevalence. Prevalence of schizophrenia is, it seems kind of small. It's between 0.3% and 0.7% of the population. There are some minor variations between race and ethnicity, geographical origin. Males do have a slightly higher amount of negative symptomology than females do. But overall, the other symptoms seem to be about the same. Developmental course of schizophrenia. You're going to want to go in and read this one for yourself. It's variable a little bit. It's on page 102 of the DSM-5. Not the current, the new one. The new one may have a different page number. I'm still citing this from the previous DSM-5, mainly because this topic did not change at all. But there's some age experiences here that I've noticed in my counseling career. Onset for most is before the age of 30 to 35. But that's not unusual to hear about someone getting it later in 30s or even in their early 40s. After the age of 45, 50, though, you won't hardly see new onset of this disorder happening. My experience, I have seen a lot of teenage girls get the diagnosis in their teenage years when they start to have their cycles, when their menses commences. And it is very difficult. So let me also mention to you an aspect of time frame here again. You're going to want to pay attention to a slow onset or a rapid onset. There is a better prognosis if the onset is rapid. If it comes on very fast, then it will likely leave equally fast and not linger or last. However, if the symptoms of the schizophrenia, the psychotic break, if they come on real slow, the delusions, the hallucinations, if they start out small and then steadily grow, that usually has a very poor prognosis and tends to last a whole lot longer while they're in their psychotic break. Now, speaking of in the psychotic break versus out of it, there is a cyclical pattern to it of going in and out of that condition. So we want to pay attention to that. Okay, so let's talk for a moment about some cultural issues, differential and comorbidity. Here again, you'll notice I've got a picture there of different drawings from patients that have been diagnosed with schizophrenia and how their images look. But we need to talk about some cultural aspects. Some cultural aspects that are considered a really interesting component to the diagnosis are individuals from countries where voodoo or witchcraft are common. The things that we'll run into here is that there's a higher diagnostic quality to that. Culturally speaking, I have found there tends to be more input. There's a lot of that quality to it, and I don't have a lot of personal experience with it, but I have seen it several times. I've already mentioned how amongst Asian population, there is a belief of having internal organs removed and replaced with machinery, where they are now robotic or android. Whereas individuals from Africa, there's a higher inclination towards demonic possessions, spirits, that kind of thing. There's also that quality of witchcraft, voodoo from the African continent, as well as from the Caribbean and the islands. The delusional beliefs there, again, you're going to want to read through that on your own. There's a lot of details to that. Differential diagnosis. The differential diagnosis here is really a quality of time. You're going to be looking at time periods, how long the onset has been, any other problems, ruling out major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, with psychotic features on both of those counts. Also looking at the schizophreniform, schizotypal personality, delusional disorders, and the schizophreniform also need to be looked at with you. Lastly, comorbidity. There's an extremely high rate of dual diagnosis, substance use, and psychiatric diagnosis combined. And the reason for that is the tendency for individuals with schizophrenia and psychotic disorder to seek street drugs, to try to help modify their own body chemistry, to repair, well, the perceptual problems that they're experiencing. That is just my opinion on it. I think it's pretty accurate. But you will find that. Also, you will find excessive amounts of nicotine and tobacco use. Chain smoking, 2, 3, 4 packs a day of cigarettes is not uncommon amongst this population. So you want to just be aware of that. In a hospital setting, here's an important little side note. Getting a smoke break is extremely important for individuals with this diagnosis. Remember, they struggle with emotional regulation already, and being told that they have missed a smoke break or they can't go on one is problematic. So you're going to want to talk to your supervisors and the people at your facilities to coordinate how to get that done. What's the hospital policy? What is the, how do they want to deal with those events? So, in any case, we are now moving into schizoaffective disorder, known as F25. Schizoaffective disorder has some criteria and type that we need to talk about, slightly different, but there's also a lot of similarities with schizophrenia. So you'll notice criteria A has an uninterrupted period of illness where there is a major mood episode, depression, required recurrent with criterion A of schizophrenia. So really, if you were to think of schizoaffective as a combination disorder diagnosis, where you have schizophrenia and a mood disorder of either depression or bipolar, then you've got schizoaffective disorder. I will say I have seen people's charts where it's labeled as having schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, or schizophrenia and major depressive disorder. And I'm like, why not just give them schizoaffective? That's why it's in the book. Here again, I'm not the psychiatrist from LPC. I don't make those calls. We don't have the ability or the licensure to challenge them based on what diagnosis they give. We can question, ask them to clarify for us why they went one route over another. And I would say 99% of the time they'll have a fairly reasonable reason for why they would go that way. So part B, delusions and hallucinations lasting 2 or more weeks in the absence of a major mood episode. And this happens throughout the lifetime of the illness. So as long as they're having it, they're going to be bouncing between delusions and hallucinations, and then into the mood disorder, and then back to the delusions and hallucinations. It is extremely difficult for them to experience this and work through it. Likely, it is also extremely difficult for you as the counselor to get familiar with their pattern and follow the cyclical nature of it, where you're on par for are they going into delusions and hallucinations, or are they going into the mood aspect. So category C, symptoms and main criteria for major mood episode are present as majority of total duration of active illness. In other words, it's there. It's just a constant. And so there's going to be a bouncing back and forth, but it's also noticing 2 or more weeks. Here again, we have to cross over and look at criteria for a major mood disorder, such as depression. And the time period on that is 2 weeks or more. And so here again, 2 weeks or more. And that would classify as clinical depression or major depressive disorder. Part D, able to rule out other general medical or drug and alcohol. Just like schizophrenia, if you cannot rule out medical, then you don't really have a clear picture for the psychiatric diagnosis. All right, so subtypes. Of course, we've got 2 primary mood disorders. Your subtypes are going to be those. They're either going to have a depressive type or they're going to have bipolar type. Now, if you're looking at bipolar type, it's going to have classifications of mania, recurrent severe, that kind of thing. Here again, crossover and look at the diagnosis for bipolar disorder. Also, it is important to recognize some changes that came out of the ICD-10 coding that are showing with and without Anthodonia. That you can add those. They can be identified as part of a specifier. Also, you can add into a severity category of subtype. And so for that, you're going to want to look in DSM and find their breakdown of severity. I'm not going to go into that for this video. All right, so we are getting close to being done, but I found this image here online under the category of schizoaffective art, and I want to point out the difference between it for artistic aspects versus the difference on schizophrenia art. Notice the color, notice the facial expressions, the mood aspects, the shock and awe or mania, the horror in the eyes, the absolute terror that goes on. And at the same time, we've got the splitting of 2 people being ripped right down to the center. This is a quality that makes schizoaffective diagnosis different than straight on schizophrenia. And a lot of that, I think, is a personal opinion, but it comes into the artistic quality. The mood component allows the individual to be a little more expressive in their artistic abilities. This one here was one of the images I found online, but I have seen some individuals that were diagnosed with schizoaffective, both bipolar type and depressive type, where their art was absolutely breathtakingly skillful, and they were able to express their emotions, their sensations so clearly that I ended up doing more art therapy with them. Now, I'm not an art therapist, but that was the only way they could express what they have experienced and how to get it out. And so I would be amiss to not tell you, if your client can express something through art or music or sound or movement therapy, then by all means let them use those modalities in counseling. It is extremely helpful for them to express what they need to get out. Okay, so let's go into some final aspects of some diagnostic features. There's your list, your prevalence, your development, cultural, differential, and suicide risk is going to be discussed. So you're going to want to go to page 107 in the DSM-5 and notice the diagnostic features resemble that of a mixture of schizophrenia and Disorganized Disorder that I've already talked about. My experience with this is that their physical appearance is usually very bizarre, very odd, with poor hygiene. Years ago, I knew a counselor who said you can smell schizophrenia and schizoaffective. I would add to it, I have an extremely sensitive olfactory system, and I can pick up on the pheromones that they're being produced, the body chemistry, the smells, the difficult hygiene that they go through. You can pick up on, and it is there. So, all right, let's look at prevalence. Schizoaffective disorder has a lifetime prevalence in the U.S. in a category of 0.3% of America, so that's less than 1%, which is still quite a bit. Developmental and course schizoaffective, very similar to schizophrenia. However, I do want to point out it has a more insidious and deceptive quality of a bizarre nature. It takes on a different appearance. In my experience, I have noticed brushing hair, combing hair, oral hygiene, those two activities of daily living tend to get thrown out the window. And I don't fully understand why that is, but it does. Cultural related issues, almost identical to that of schizophrenia. Differential diagnosis, here again, very similar to schizophrenia. You want to review those. Suicide risk, this one is uniquely different. DSM-5 will not discuss suicide risk for schizophrenia as much. However, because of the mood disorder component, there is a higher risk and rate of suicide amongst this population. It happens to be 5%. So as we notice, the prevalence is only 0.3%, less than 1% of Americans have schizoaffective disorder, but out of those that do, 5% will experience suicide attempts. And it's a difficult problem that we have to address because their reality, their perceptions are so skewed from what most of us experience that for them, coming to that determination to terminate their perceptions is quite interesting. I would go so far as to say that one of the good movies out there that you could look at to get an idea of schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, there's two that come to mind. One, of course, is Fight Club. Absolutely amazing acting on how the physical perception of this psychotic disorder that happens. The second one would be a true story of Dr. John Nash, called A Beautiful Mind, where his was schizophrenia with a component of delusions with regards to grandeur as well as persecution. So, anyways, fascinating stuff. There are, like I said, lots of movies related to these disorders, and some of them are really good, some of them are not so much. Okay, well, we have included a Welcome to Supervision session, DSM review of psychotic disorders, and it has extended just over 1 hour long. This is the longest video I've done up to this point in time. One, I will say I am sorry for being so lengthy. That was not my intention. It was just, I couldn't see any other way of getting the information done other than breaking up and going into multiples, and I just didn't see the point doing that. So, in any case, welcome to Supervision, guys. If you're one of my associates, I probably will have asked you to watch this episode and to help you gain insight into the nuances of psychotic disorder. If you're not one of mine, then hopefully this was helpful for you too. I will say, the more time you spend in and around individuals with psychotic disorders, you will learn, as I did, and I think as most of us do, it's not to be feared. It is to be recognized and respected, as these are individuals who are having a really hard life. And many of them end up homeless on the streets, and afterwards they may end up in group homes. There's a lot of trauma involved in these guys, and you have to take that into consideration as well. Not only childhood problems and abuse, but adulthood issues as well. And so, when you get a chance to sit down and really just talk to someone who has a psychotic disorder, don't confront them, don't challenge them. Just let them talk to you, let them share their experience, let them share their life. And I think you'll be amazed at the amount of information you'll get from them and how much help you can be to them by just letting them share their life with you. So, okay, until next time, keep doing what you're doing and stay ethical. And we'll keep doing what we're doing, and I'll see you guys in either individual sessions or in our group sessions.